Hi, my name is Morten, and in this video we will be continuing our journey throughout the checkout flow of our webshop. In the last video we managed to create the product page and add products to our baskets. So in this video, after adding the products that we desire, we can now click the mini cart and see the basket content. At least that's what we're building in this particular video. So first off, I will select one of my variants and I will add it to my cart. Notice that I don't have a cart until I added my product. This means that in Ucommerce, you actually don't have to consider whether or not the user already has a cart when you add products to it. If it doesn't exist, we'll of course create it, making it very convenient as you don't have to take that into account when you create your site. So that's very convenient as a developer that I don't have to care about that. So after it has been added to a cart, Ucommerce will automatically generate a basket ID and set a cookie on the user's computer, matching the basket ID. So we can see that here we have a cookie called basket ID, where the content of this cookie matches a GUID that are associated with the basket in the database, which means that my basket is not tied to a session, but rather a cookie, which means that I can revisit my basket 3 days later and still do the checkout. And this is also very convenient, as we will save all the data. You can use that for appended basket functionality or similar strategies that helps you up your conversion rate. All right, so we now have a basket. It's stored as a cookie, as we just discussed. And up here I have my mini cart functionality already pre-implemented for the Masterclass. We don't have to do that because the APIs that we will be using for the mini cart is similar to the ones that we will be using in the basket page. So no need to redo too much of the work. In my CMS, I have already created the basket page, and can see that this link here points to a page called /basket. So that's where our basket page will be built. And when I click this link, I have already created the page, but it's totally empty, so we have to implement all this. So there's a lot of different things that are relevant to show on baskets. We also store more information that you maybe need in order to present for your customers. So there's a lot of different totals on the order and on the order lines, which are more or less sub-calculations that would make up in the end the order total. So there's a lot of information you need to take into account. What are the pieces of information that I want to show for my customer, and then be cautious about what I'm actually showing. But we will take a look at what we have available, and we also have a very excellent documentation page that breaks down all the different numbers and totals of the basket. But in the end, what we need is to be able to show an order total for the customer. And the order total is automatically calculated when I add to cart, or when I in generally modify my content of the basket. Then we have a concept called the basket pipeline that we will talk a little bit more about in a later video. We will be using the API execute basket pipeline every time we modify the basket, which will then trigger updating of the order total. For example, if I add a product, we have to calculate what is the new subtotal, what is the new tax the customer needs to pay, what's the new shipping total, and so on and so forth. More details about that later. For now, let's try to peek into the APIs and see what possibilities we have. We want to show the individual order lines, as well as showing the individual totals like subtotal, tax, shipping, and order total. And we also want the user to be able to modify the content of the basket on this page. So we will explore APIs that help you remove order lines or adjust the quantities as well. So let's dive right into it and see what we have. So my basket page is controlled via the basket controller. So we have done a lot of controllers already, and this is no different than any other page in our web shop. We have a purchase order view model that we need to fill out. So we need to grab the order coming from transaction library. We already have that associated up here. Again, similar to what we have done already, use the IOC container to grab an implementation of an interface that serves the purpose that we need. In this case, a transaction library. And this is the first touch point with transaction library, which is also an indication that we're actually now shifting away from presenting products and categories online to now working on our basket, which is the first step of our checkout flow. So for the remainder of this masterclass, we will primarily be working with transaction library to build up our checkout flow. So with transaction library, we can now grab the basket. And that's what I will be doing here. Our basket is of the type Ucommerce .entities v2. Entities v2 are associated directly with the data that we have in our SQL server. No transaction data is stored in the indexes like catalog data is. That is something that may come in a later version of Ucommerce, but for now, all transactional data will be stored in SQL Server, and that also means that the types will always be associated with the entities v2 namespace in Ucommerce. Notice here that the type is a purchase order and not a basket. In Ucommerce, all different baskets and orders and canceled orders and completed orders are of this type, purchase order. So a basket, you can say, is just an order in an earlier state with an order status called basket. That's very convenient, as I don't have to take into consideration different types with different properties on them. It's all the same, so we can treat them the same and then just vary the logic depending on the order status. We don't have to check that in here because transaction library will give us a basket, a purchase order of status basket if we don't have one already. Here we have an optional parameter called create, which allows us to set whether or not the basket will be created when we call get basket. In this case, we don't want to create one as we already have one when we added a product previously. So on the checkout flow, we can usually just stick with false, but that will also mean that we will probably run into an error if we try to access a link to a page in the checkout flow explicitly. But let's try to map our content of the basket onto the basket page. For this, we need to access the basket that we have already loaded with transaction library. So now it's actually just a matter of taking the information on the basket, putting them on the view model, and then rendering the page. Similar to what we have done so far in the other exercises as well. So we have our purchase order view model, and on this particular page, we're interested in just the content of the basket, not customer information or something like that. We can always map that out if we wanted to, of course, but let's just keep to what we have on the order lines as well as the individual totals of the basket, which is the tax total and the order total and so on and so forth. On the preview page, which is the last page of the checkout before we go to payment, we will show the same information plus a little bit more. So here we can see another example of how that's done, but that's later on in the rest of the training videos. But we have our purchase order view model here. So let's try to map the totals of the basket. So on my purchase order view model, I am of course interested in showing what are the tax, what is the order total, what's the shipment, and what's the subtotal, so we can make a nice breakdown of the content of the basket. We have more information here on the basket than we probably want to show for the customer, but it's there in case we need it for something valuable. But let's try to map the different totals here. So let's start out with the tax. So tax is, as we have discussed in one of the previous videos, calculated for products when they are added to the cart. So in the back office, we of course show prices without VAT, and then that's applied into the order via the basket pipeline I've mentioned previously. So on the basket pipeline, one of the components in there is to calculate the tax for the individual lines and sum up the tax total. So that includes all tax from all products and from shipments and from payments. All that are related to tax is on the tax total, and we can see all the breakdowns as well. For example, on the order lines that would make up the tax total. But we can map it here. And tax total is a string on our view model because we want to show also the currency symbol on the total. This is just a way that it can be done. If you want to control that yourself, then you can just get the decimal value on the purchase order as well, which we will be using now. We will create a new instance of a money object, which is part of the core Ucommerce namespace. And money takes in a decimal value. In this case, it's our tax total. Get value or default. And then it is a currency ISO code, which we have on the basket as well. So billing currency, and then the ISO code. And I'm trying to map a money into a string. I cannot do that, so I need to call to string as well. And the cool thing about the money object here is that it will automatically format itself based on the culture of the website, or based off the culture of the customer, which means that if he's a US customer, then he will see decimal separators, currency symbols, and stuff like that differently to what I would see if I am a Danish customer. So the money object will automatically take care of that. Of course, there's plenty of other options how to solve that issue. For example, with modern front-end technologies and JavaScript that can do that stuff for you as well. So here we just handle on the server side, but it's up to you how you want to do it. Which means that I could, of course, also just return the decimal value. But we're going to do this a few times for the tax total and for the order total. So I will just copy paste this line here because I'm a little bit lazy. So it's the same thing over and over. So it's just a bit of boilerplate code, so to speak. Instead of the tax total, I also want the order total, which is the entire amount the customer needs to pay based on how the state of the basket is right now. So if I add products or remove products, order total will change. If I use a voucher code, which will give me a discount, then this discount will also be reflected in the order total. So that is the final amount, including everything. And that is, of course, a very important number that you want to present for your customer. Besides the tax and the order, we also have shipping total and we have subtotal. Subtotal is the amount the customer needs to pay without VAT and some other stuff in there as well. And as I previously mentioned, you can also see the documentation page about what the individual total amounts on the purchase order and the order lines mean. Because there are a lot of numbers and each of them serve different purposes, and there's a nice breakdown on the doc side that shows you exactly what all those different numbers mean. So subtotal, and I also want to show shipping total. So let's just map that as well. So the general pattern here is that on the purchase order view model, the final content that the customer needs to pay is mapped on the order total. But what we do in the end is that we actually just add up all these different totals of the order: tax total, discount total, subtotal, shipping total, payment total, and stuff like that, which will make up the order total in the end. So the basket pipeline mentioned a few times will make sure to update all these different numbers here. So first it will calculate what are the tags, then it will calculate what are the discounts, and it will calculate what is the shipping costs, and then keep all these numbers up to date and eventually make up the order total. So that's why we're using all the totals here. So these are the core numbers on the purchase order. We of course also want to show the individual order lines that he have, with what is the product he purchased and how many of said items do they have in their cart, and show the tax and the price as well. So here we just need to iterate our basket order lines collection. Basket has a list of order lines, which will, surprisingly enough, contain information around all the different order lines on my model. So on the purchase order view model, I will now add in a new view model per order line in my basket. Again, fairly trivial stuff. Not a lot of crazy things are going on here besides me mistyping while I live code. We have some important things here that we need to map as well, besides the product data, which is the order line ID, because we're going to use that in the API in just a few minutes in order to modify the order line, so adding or removing items from that particular line. And for that we need the order line ID mapped as well. So I will start out by doing that. And then I have different information around my order lines here as well. I have the product. Notice here that on my order line I don't have a link directly back to the product, because from a commerce point of view that doesn't really make sense. As a purchase order with order lines, they tend to keep in a longer time span than the actual product does. So if I had a hard link back to my product, well, eventually that product will go away. Or if I would map the price directly from the product, that means that all transaction data going back will change every time I change the product as well. Bad idea. So we have this concept where when we add a product to our cart, we take a snapshot of the information we need and put them on the order lines. For example, the name, the SKU, the price, and so on. So it's right there isolated on the order itself and not linked back to the product. So we want the product name as well. And we want this SKU. And we want the total, again a string. So again, I will be creating this money object. So the total of the order line, again, a breakdown of all the different numbers. So the order line also has a total amount, which is the amount the customer needs to pay for that particular order line. I want to present also what is the individual units worth, so the unit price. Which is the property called price. And last thing, I also want to present the tax. Sometimes that does not make sense. As a B2C customer, I tend to not really care about what is the tax on the individual lines. Mostly I would just see what is the subtotal and what is the entire amount of tax I need to pay for the entire order. But again, we have the option to do it here, so let's just do it for the demo purpose. It's of course up to you to define how you want to present tags. It varies from shop to shop when it makes sense to do that, especially also in a B2B, B2C scenario. And we need to call get value or default here, and not here, but here we need to call to string. We need to do that up here as well. And we need to do it down here as well. And that's it. So now we map the totals of the order as well as each of the order lines. And again, the order line ID here is important. Let's explore why now. And that's because on the basket page, we of course want the customer to be able to add or remove products from his cart. Fairly standard, straightforward feature as well. For that, we need the order line ID, and we need to implement the post method down here, which is now my customer modified the quantities on the order line. So we take that in on our post, as well as the order line ID. Right. So on my post method here, all I have to do is call transaction library, update line item by order line ID, which is why I needed it in the first place, and I need to pass in the new quantity. If I pass in 0 or less, Ucommerce will automatically remove that particular order line. So we cannot have a minus number on there, which is why we will just remove it internally. So update line item both serves as upping or downing the quantity as well as removing it if we pass in 0. Good. Last thing I need to do after I removed my product, which is my basket now needs to get into a state where it's again ready to be checked out and it matches all the different totals. So I just modified my order line. So now the order total will not reflect that new reality. To make sure that happens, I call transaction library execute basket pipeline, which will then again update the content of the order and make sure that it's in a state where it's ready to be checked out. Last here I return index, which will now just refresh the basket page with all the different totals up to date. So let's compile and see if it works. All right, my page has reloaded, and I can now see that I have one item in my cart, and it reflects all the different numbers that I had on my page. So let's try to up some of the quantities, and let's see that it actually follows along nicely. The tax is 100 as the price is 100 as configured in the backend. I have 15% VAT, which totals up to 150 per item, and my subtotal is 300. So without VAT, the tax is equivalent to 45 euros, and that gives me an order total of 345 when I have 3 items in my cart. So I have the ability to up and down my quantities here and remove the product over here as well. So basically it will just call the update line item by ID in the post. So specify 0 out here to remove it, or I can just count up and down here as well. And eventually when I hit 0, my product will be removed from my cart, and the cart is now empty. I still have the cart saved in the database, meaning that once I add a new product, I will not get a new basket at all. I'll just reuse the same one. I can see here in my cookies that we have the basket ID, which corresponds to the basket saved in my database. That's it for this video. I hope you enjoyed it, and see you in the next one.